The air hung heavy with damp warmth, each breath thick with the scent of wet earth and decomposing leaves. Jane sat cross-legged on the forest floor, far enough from the path that the occasional rustle of passing animals did not reach her. Sunlight filtered in thin, trembling shafts, casting a muted lattice over the undergrowth. She had expected the chimpanzees to move through their morning rituals in predictable loops, grunts, sniffing, soft clicks, but today something shifted in the rhythm. A young male, barely larger than a child, stepped from behind a twisted root and froze, eyes fixed on a distant corner of the clearing. He tilted his head as though listening for something inaudible, and then lowered his body closer to the ground, shoulders tight, fingers brushing the soil. The others, usually restless with chatter and movement, slowed in response, one by one, until the entire group seemed suspended. Not alarmed exactly, but alert in a way that prickled Jane's skin. She exhaled slowly, heart slowing with the attempt at stillness, yet a small question lodged itself in her mind. What had caught their attention, and why did it unsettle them so completely without a sound? The group had settled into a near halt, each chimpanzee breathing quietly, their limbs pressed close to the earth but not resting. Jane observed the young male in front of her first. He flexed his fingers against the soil, pausing mid-motion several times as if unsure whether to dig or retreat. His eyes flicked repeatedly toward the far edge of the clearing, where a shadow pooled among the roots of an old fig tree. A female, older and usually the most confident among them, shifted her weight from one foot to the other, her knuckles brushing the ground with slow, almost deliberate taps. She glanced toward the male, her gaze sharp but calm, as though checking his mood and measuring the correctness of her own stance. Jane noted the subtle dip of her shoulders when he did not meet her eyes fully, a posture that suggested tension but restraint, an unspoken negotiation of the space around them. Another male moved behind a low vine tangle, stepping lightly and pressing his palm against the bark to steady himself. He made no sound, yet the soft scrape of his claws against the tree bark carried through the still air. Every movement seemed weighted, deliberate. Jane's eyes followed him, seeing the faint ripple along the line of his spine as he hesitated mid-step, then resumed forward. The group's center had subtly shifted, creating a narrow wedge between him and the young male. The physical gap mirrored a growing psychological distance. The young male's hand twitched once, then twice, brushing at a leaf without dislodging it. He let out a soft, breathy exhalation, barely audible, and immediately froze, scanning the others. Two juveniles sat nearby, unusually quiet, their usual high-pitched chirps absent. One of them tilted its head in the same slow, deliberate motion as the young male, and Jane felt a slight tremor of recognition. The mimicry of attention, the shared uncertainty, the subtle collective holding of breath. The air felt suspended between movements. Jane noticed how each chimpanzee had angled its body slightly toward the center of the group, yet kept peripheral awareness in all directions. The older female, lips pressed together tightly for a moment, then parted slightly as she exhaled, releasing a faint hiss. Nothing more, but the sound seemed to echo through the small clearing. A small branch snapped to her left. Not loud, but enough to cause the juveniles to shift closer to the young male, who straightened, head swiveling. The older female's posture tightened, her tail, usually relaxed, flicked once. Jane resisted the urge to move her own body or make any sudden gesture, knowing that even the slightest change could ripple through the group. Time became a series of micro-pauses. Each chimpanzee's gaze lingered on the others, moving in subtle arcs, registering small shifts in breathing, posture, and attention. Their hands scratched, brushed, and occasionally hovered, never settling completely. Jane realized the group's usual energy, playful, scattered, unself-conscious, had folded inward, coiled around an undefined center of awareness. The young male knelt slowly, one knee brushing the dirt. His shoulders rose and fell in shallow, controlled breaths. He glanced at Jane once fleetingly, and she caught the brief recognition, as though he acknowledged her presence but did not trust it to be significant. Nearby, another chimpanzee moved his hand toward a pile of leaves, then withdrew it, repeating the motion without purpose. The pause itself seemed meaningful, each hesitation stretching longer than the one before. No one made a definitive move, yet the accumulation of these small gestures thickened the atmosphere. Jane could feel the weight of every glance, every slow shift in position. A silence deeper than the ordinary jungle quiet had settled over them, a living, almost sentient pause. Even the usual chorus of insects had softened, replaced by the faint crackle of decomposing leaves under occasional footsteps. The group's formation subtly shifted again. The juveniles crept a little closer together, keeping line of sight to the young male. The older female leaned slightly toward the far edge of the clearing, tilting her head, lips parted just enough to release a soft exhale. The young male's body tensed minutely, fingers curling around the soil, only to relax a fraction later. Every adjustment seemed to ask a question that had no answer. Minutes passed. Each second stretched, punctuated by the smallest of signals, a twitch, a glance, a scratch. Jane's own body felt a mirrored tension, her attention divided between the minute details of fur, posture, and expression. She realized the group was negotiating something intangible, a silent conversation carried entirely in hesitation, gaze, and tiny shifts in stance. A single leaf fluttered to the ground from above. The young male followed it with his eyes, but no one moved. He exhaled softly again, and the older female's tail flicked in response. Jane felt her own pulse slow, trying to match the rhythm of their restrained breathing. No alarm, no overt threat, but a quiet suspense that demanded recognition. She wondered, what did they know that she could not yet see? The young male remained crouched at the edge of the clearing, his body low, knuckles brushing the soil in small, almost imperceptible circles. Jane's eyes were fixed on him, but she felt a sense of distance, as if she were observing not just his body but the currents of thought flowing through it. The group had scattered slightly, forming a loose semicircle around him, each member maintaining a subtle vigilance without overt action. He raised one hand, fingers hovering above a tangle of dry leaves, then withdrew it. A pause stretched long enough for Jane to count the inhalation and exhalation of each chest in the semicircle, 8 distinct, deliberate breaths, each one measured against the next. The young male tilted his head, ears twitching faintly, his gaze sweeping slowly from one observer to another. No sound emerged, no warning call, no shriek of alarm, only the low, rhythmic rustle of leaves under gentle weight. Yet in that quiet, Jane sensed something immense. The older female shifted forward, but not decisively. Her movement was incremental, measured, almost imperceptible. She angled her torso slightly, testing the distance, then froze. Her eyes did not leave the young male, but there was no direct challenge either, no claim of dominance. Her tail flicked once softly, an almost internal gesture, and the young male's shoulder muscles tensed in response. Then nothing. The young male flexed his fingers again, brushing lightly against a leaf without disturbing it. His eyes darted momentarily to Jane, then back to the older female. There was a flicker of hesitation, perhaps a decision forming and dissolving in the same heartbeat. He did not move closer, nor did he retreat. Instead, his posture folded inward, a subtle contraction of his chest and shoulders. Jane felt a small prickle of empathy. Not human empathy exactly, but the recognition of something fragile and unspoken, balanced on the edge of action and inaction. One juvenile, usually the first to break tension with play, inched forward as if drawn to the young male's uncertainty. The older female's eyes narrowed slightly, and the juvenile paused mid-step, hovering as though suspended by invisible thread. Their gaze met for a fraction of a second, and Jane imagined the dialogue that must have passed there, muted, wordless, and heavy with expectation. The young male exhaled softly, almost as if he too had felt the pressure of that silent scrutiny. He shifted a hand to the ground again, brushing at a patch of damp soil, and then froze. Jane noticed the subtle contraction of his jaw, the way his eyes flicked toward the older female, then quickly away. Something hovered in that glance, doubt, curiosity, caution. Every micro-motion seemed amplified in the still air. The older female did not advance, did not speak with sound, but Jane could see the tautness in her body, the way each muscle seemed coiled just beneath the surface. A reservoir of potential movement held back by restraint. Minutes passed. The young male remained crouched, inhaling, exhaling, adjusting the placement of his hands by millimeters. Jane's own breathing slowed, unconsciously mirroring his rhythm. The forest seemed to condense around the group, every sound, the faint drip of water from a leaf, the soft rustle of distant branches magnified. Time had stretched into a series of infinitesimal decisions, to move, to hold, to glance, to watch. The juvenile shifted again, nudging a dry leaf with a toe. The older female responded with a nearly invisible adjustment of her body, leaning slightly toward the center without advancing fully. The young male's fingers twitched, but he did not grasp. He exhaled with a soundless hiss, drawing his shoulders inward. The tension in that tiny gesture communicated volumes. Jane realized she was watching not an act but a negotiation. It was a negotiation without words, without explicit outcomes, and yet it carried weight far beyond its small physical scale. The young male's hesitation, the older female's careful measure, the juvenile's tentative curiosity, all formed a web of interaction as delicate as a spider's silk, yet as tense as a drawn bow. Each participant responded to the others in real time, recalculating risk and intention with every heartbeat. A single leaf drifted down from above, falling between the young male and the older female. Both glanced at it, and Jane felt the subtle shift in air that accompanies a collective pause. Neither reached for it, neither broke the stillness. And yet the leaf became a pivot, a marker of the unspoken. Could movement occur? Should it occur? Would it matter? The young male's eyes darted along the line of the semicircle, registering subtle signs, the flick of a tail, the shift of weight, the narrowing of eyes. He tilted his head slightly, a slow, deliberate gesture, then returned to the soil beneath his knuckles. Jane could see the micro-decisions unfold in real time, each one a careful calibration of caution and curiosity. Every tiny movement was a probe, a test, a question without an answer. He finally drew one hand back completely, raising it briefly in the air, then letting it hover. The older female's gaze followed, and she did not respond with aggression, only with the slightest shift of posture, a minimal engagement. The juvenile remained motionless, watching, learning, absorbing the patterns. Jane noticed that even the air seemed charged, the forest itself holding a quiet suspense as though it too had recognized the importance of this moment. For a long stretch, nothing changed. The young male's fingers hovered, the older female's eyes lingered, the juvenile's attention remained fixed. Jane felt a creeping, almost physical pressure, the kind that comes from witnessing a negotiation unfolding entirely in hesitation and gaze. There was no resolution, no climax, only the slow, deliberate unfolding of attention and restraint, each action weighted by doubt and possibility. She exhaled softly, but even that motion seemed intrusive, almost inappropriate in the sacred tension surrounding the young male. And then she realized, this was not about fear or challenge or dominance. It was about presence, awareness, and the quiet communication that existed in the space between motion and stillness. For the first time that morning, Jane understood that what she was witnessing could not be simplified, could not be forced into human terms, and would not reveal itself on anyone else's schedule. The young male finally lowered his hand completely, letting it rest on the soil as though releasing a small weight he had been holding unseen. The older female's posture softened almost imperceptibly, and the juvenile exhaled with a quiet sigh, a sound so faint that Jane almost missed it. No one moved with urgency, no celebration, no triumphant gesture. Instead, the air itself seemed to relax, just slightly, as if a shared tension had been acknowledged and allowed to dissipate. Jane sat quietly, aware that her own pulse had mirrored theirs, felt the subtle tension in her shoulders ease. She realized slowly that the group's behavior had never been about fear nor about threat. It had been about attention, mutual awareness, delicate calibration, a constant negotiation of presence and intention. Each hesitation, each micro-movement, each glance had been a conversation without words, a way to navigate the space of possibility safely. The young male leaned forward, his fingers brushing the earth again, but this time without hesitation. He drew a line in the soil, a simple trace, and then paused, head tilted. The older female's gaze followed, and Jane saw in that brief moment a kind of shared acknowledgement, not approval, not command, but recognition. It was subtle, and it did not need sound. Their eyes held the same question they had asked before, only now there was less tension, less uncertainty. They were together in understanding, even if that understanding was not complete. Jane realized the enormity of that quietness. The absence of overt drama or violence did not mean absence of meaning. The chimpanzees had communicated, had responded to one another with precision and care, and had maintained a balance that could not be rushed. The young male had been negotiating risk, the older female monitoring, the juvenile learning the rhythm of restraint. All of it had unfolded without spectacle, without rush, without resolution in the human sense, but profoundly complete within the group's own system. A faint wind stirred the leaves above, scattering small droplets of moisture from the canopy. The young male followed one with his gaze, but no one moved to intercept it. The older female's shoulders shifted slightly, a subtle adjustment to remain aware without intrusion. Jane noticed how the group's formation had loosened almost imperceptibly, the semicircle opening, bodies reclining slightly, tails relaxing. The tension had not vanished entirely. It lingered like the aftertaste of a strong tea, subtle but present, marking the memory of what had passed. The young male stood briefly, stretching long and deliberate, and then crouched again. Jane realized she had been holding her own breath, and she let it out slowly, almost in tandem with him. There was a rhythm here, one that she had not understood fully until this morning, and it was not her rhythm but theirs. She understood that presence mattered as much as action, that observation, patience, and attentiveness were as vital as movement or sound. The older female nudged the juvenile lightly, a minimal touch that communicated neither chastisement nor encouragement, only attention and connection. The young male shifted closer to the group, settling in a space that was neither central nor subordinate but entirely appropriate to the moment. Jane felt an unexpected relief, not a dramatic release, but the recognition of cohesion, balance, and intelligence at work in ways that did not require human framing. Her own role in this quiet interplay became apparent. She had been a witness, an outsider quietly entwined in their attention, her presence acknowledged but unobtrusive. The weight of that awareness pressed gently on her consciousness. The forest did not act for spectacle. The chimpanzees did not perform for her. Yet her observation mattered because she had been patient, because she had allowed the small tensions, pauses, and hesitations to unfold without interference. A small insect landed on the young male's shoulder. He brushed it away without haste, without distraction, and the older female's gaze followed the motion, lingering for just a moment longer than necessary. Jane marveled at the subtlety of their interactions, the recognition, the negotiation, the restraint that defined the moment more than any outward drama ever could. She realized that the forest itself had been a partner in this unfolding, its muted sounds, shifting light, and damp air providing context and rhythm. The young male's eyes met hers for a fraction of a second, not with human appeal or question, but with the faint acknowledgement of awareness. She could not interpret it fully, and that was precisely the point. Meaning had emerged not in answers, but in the careful unfolding of attention, the negotiation of presence, and the measured response to uncertainty. For the first time that morning, Jane felt the quiet satisfaction that came from understanding without possession, from witnessing without altering. The weight of the morning, the hesitation, the tension, the almost imperceptible dialogue, had resolved not with clarity but with recognition. Each individual had claimed their space, asserted their attention, and returned to rest within the shared bounds of the group. She exhaled again, slower this time, letting the forest and its inhabitants absorb her breath alongside theirs. There was no finality, no tidy explanation, no dramatic revelation. Instead, there was something quieter, something earned in silence, the awareness that life, communication, and understanding could exist in forms entirely self-contained, subtle, and profound. And yet, even as she felt the weight lift, one small movement caught her eye, a subtle twitch in the young male's shoulder, fleeting almost unnoticed. She could not tell if it was hesitation, anticipation, or simply a flicker of muscle. It lingered in her mind, a reminder that not all could be understood, not all could be explained. Some truths remained private, observed only in the briefest glances, the smallest pauses, and the silent spaces between action and intention. Jane rose slowly, careful not to disturb the calm that had settled over the group. The young male had shifted again, settling back onto the forest floor with the same measured deliberation that had marked his morning. The older female watched him for a moment longer, her posture relaxed but alert, then turned her attention to the canopy, inspecting a branch that swayed slightly in the breeze. The juvenile curled close to her side, eyes bright but still watchful. She walked a few steps away, feeling the moss beneath her feet, and realized how intimately she had been drawn into the rhythm of the group without speaking or moving. The tension, the hesitation, the silent communication, all of it had left its mark, not as a dramatic story to tell, but as a quiet, almost imperceptible shift in her understanding of presence. Observation had become participation of a sort, a shared awareness of space and intention that needed no words. The forest itself seemed to breathe with them. Light fell in fractured patterns across the ground, dappling leaves and moss with fleeting geometry. Birds called softly in the distance, insects murmured over the damp earth, and yet the forest chorus did not disturb the fragile cohesion of the chimpanzees. Jane felt that this balance, so delicately maintained, was neither fragile nor fragile, simply alive in a way humans often overlooked. The young male's gaze caught hers once more, and this time she noticed something she had not before, a tiny, almost imperceptible flick of his shoulder, a twitch so brief that she nearly missed it. It was neither hesitation nor alarm, at least not in the human sense. It was a movement whose meaning she could not translate, yet she sensed it carried weight within the group, a quiet signal, private and internal, understood only by them. She realized that some behaviors would remain a mystery, small threads woven into the fabric of their lives that no human could fully unravel. And that realization did not frustrate her. Instead, it deepened her attention, sharpened her curiosity. To witness without claiming full understanding was a rare gift, and she felt its quiet resonance echo through her own awareness. The meaning of the morning, she understood, had not been in the answer to a question, but in the act of watching the question unfold in real time with patience and care. She glanced back at the group, noting how each individual now moved with a subtler confidence, a quiet trust in the rhythms they had negotiated together. Even the smallest gestures, the lean of a shoulder, the tilt of a head, the shift of weight from one foot to another spoke of a dialogue that required no explanation beyond itself. Each behavior carried intention, yet none demanded interpretation beyond the moment. As she gathered her notebook and adjusted her bag, Jane's mind lingered on that tiny flick in the young male's shoulder. Its significance was opaque, yet it was real, and it had passed between them without words, without sound, without conclusion. She realized that part of the richness of observation was this very ambiguity, the recognition that some mysteries are meant to be held lightly, not solved, appreciated rather than explained. She paused at the edge of the clearing, looking back one last time. The chimpanzees were already fading into the shadows of the forest, moving with quiet purpose, yet her memory of their gestures, their hesitations, and their subtle glances lingered like a second pulse beneath her own awareness. She understood in that moment that presence was both shared and private, and that curiosity could thrive precisely because not all could be known. And so she left with a question lodged softly in her mind, one without a clear answer. What did that fleeting shoulder flick mean to him and to the group in ways she could never fully perceive? The forest held its quiet answer, and she knew she would return to watch, to notice, to wait. Because some stories unfold not in grand gestures, but in the delicate, almost invisible movements that shape the life of those who dwell quietly within it.